Okay, so today is part 3 of the series that we've been doing called How Not to Be Your Own Worst Enemy. And the reason why we're doing this series is because we recognize, this is not just you, this is all of us, that so many of us are in the exact same place, January 2020, that we were in January 2019, maybe 18, maybe 17, maybe 16, in the sense that we haven't improved, we haven't grown. Every year, the new year comes around, we're filled with hope. This is my year. This is where I'm going to lose weight. This is where I'm going to get a breakthrough. This is where I'm going to get promoted. This is my year. But all of a sudden, 3, 4, 5, maybe even right now, some of you, a few weeks into the new year, you've already resolved to fallen back into bad habits. You've already slipped back into old ways. You're already back to where you started, or maybe even worse. And so the question we asked was, how do we help each other? How do we help ourselves this year not to be our own worst enemy? And more importantly, because we are a church, what does God have to say? How possibly could God help us? Because I believe God is very interested in us. How could he help us not to be our own worst enemy? And today is the final message in the series. Now, if you're here and you have the on your phone, the Bible app, if you click on the Bible app, a YouVersion, go on more, click events, you'll find Lighthouse Church Dublin. All of today's notes are there for you, and some other resources that can help you. And again, these messages will be online at lighthousechurch.ie. But today, I want to bring you the third and closing message of this series. And to kick us off, I want to talk to you about a book that I was reading a few months ago called 12 Rules for Life by a well-known psychologist and philosopher, Jordan B. Peterson. This is a really, really great book. I highly recommend you read it. It's like 12 kind of practical rules that we should have in our lives as an antidote to chaos. But in one of his chapters, the chapter he talks about being precise in your speech, he tells this story, which I think is really funny. I want to open with today. So the story begins. There's a story. There's no such thing. Yes. There's a story for children called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon by Jack Kent that I really like, and it's a very simple tale, at least on the surface. I once read its few pages to a group of retired University of Toronto alumni and explained its symbolic meaning. It's about a small boy, Billy Bixby, who spies a dragon sitting on his bed one morning. It's about the size of a house cat and friendly. He tells his mother about it, but she tells him that there's no such thing as a dragon, right? So it starts to grow. It eats all of Billy's pancakes. Oh. Soon it fills the whole house. Mom tries to vacuum, but she has to go in and out of the house through the windows because the dragon is everywhere. It takes her forever. Then the dragon runs off with the house. Billy's dad comes home and there's just an empty space. Can you imagine this scene? Where he used to live. The mailman tells him where the house went, so he chases after it, climbs up the dragon's head and neck, now sprawling out into the street, and rejoins his wife and son. Mom still insists that the dragon does not exist. But Billy, who's pretty much had it by now, insists, there is a dragon, Mom. And instantly, it starts to shrink. Soon, it's cat-sized again. And everyone agrees that dragons of that size, number one, exist and are much preferable to their gigantic counterparts. Mom, eyes reluctantly open by this point, asks somewhat plaintively why it had to get so big. Billy quietly suggests maybe it wanted to be noticed. This is key. Maybe. That's the moral of many, many stories. Chaos emerges in a household, bit by bit. Mutual unhappiness and resentment pile up. Everything untidy is swept under the rug, where the dragon feasts on the crumbs. But no one says anything, as the shared society and negotiated order of the household reveals itself as inadequate or disintegrates in the face of the unexpected and threatening. Everybody whistles in the dark instead. Communication would require admission of terrible emotions: resentment, terror, loneliness, despair, jealousy, frustration, hatred, and boredom. Moment by moment, it's easier to keep the peace. But in the background, in Billy Bixby's house, and in all that are like it, the dragon grows. One day it bursts forth in a form that no one can ignore. It lifts the very household from its foundations. Then it's an affair, or decades-long custody dispute, or ruinous economic and psychological proportions. Then it's the concentrated version of the acrimony that could have been spread out tolerably issue by issue over the years of the pseudo-paradise of the marriage. Every one of the 300,000 unrevealed issues which have been lied about, avoided, rationalized away, hidden, like an army of skeletons in some great horrific closet, bursts forth like Noah's flood, drowning everything. There's no ark because no one built one, even though everyone felt the storm was gathering. Is that a great piece of literature? What Jordan is talking about is something we all know. That when our lives blow up, when our marriages blow up, when our relationship with our parents blow up, when our relationship with our siblings blow up, when our relationship with our employer blows up, when our life blows up and everything starts to disintegrate, even though we may feel like someone has just lobbed a hand grenade into our life and we're a victim, the truth is it's not that simple. Usually there's a long, slow building up, ignoring, offsetting of tension, that a lack of wisdom, a not treating people with mutual respect, a lack of communication that basically leads to the destruction of our world. That's exactly today, as we close this series, what I want to talk to you about. Now again, in this series we said a couple of things that are quite crucial and quite foundational. The first one I want to remind you of, maybe you're here for the first time and tell you about, is simply this. You have participated in all your bad decisions. Okay, like Billy's mom, we have all participated in our bad decisions. In fact, if you're here right now and you feel like your whole house has been lifted up and carried off and you're in chaos, understand that in all the cases where it comes to our decisions, we were the masterminds of our bad decisions. We can't blame anyone else for our decisions. In fact, a single bad decision is always the first step to becoming your own worst enemy. As we look at this new year, we're saying, hey, how can we take some different steps so we can become our own best friend? Why? Because every habit begins with a first time. Come on, every pattern begins with a first line, and every journey begins with a first step. This is true. This is just true. If you're here and you're a Christ follower and you love Jesus, this is true for you. If you're here and you don't love Jesus, you're not a Christian, Christ follower, person of faith, this is still true. This is just principle human truth, that every habit begins with a first time. And if we're going to change the trajectory of our journey, we've got to start with habits and patterns, ways of thinking, decision-making processes. Now, what we call these is, we call them preemptive habits. And the only way we can combat bad habits is with some new ones, okay? And so in this series, what I've tried to do is give you 3 really practical preemptive habits that will stop you from being your own worst enemy. Number 1, 2 weeks ago, was pay attention to the... Say with me, 1, 2, 3. Pay attention to the tension. Again, when you find yourself, something's just not right, something's not sitting right, you have opportunity or you've been led on a certain path, and something in you says, hang on a second. What we're saying is, don't ignore that tension. If something's not right within you, when your friends are saying, let's go to this place, or your bosses know everyone does this, or you find yourself at a point where you're not sure if something's right or wrong, don't ignore the tension, but pay attention to it because it's trying to tell you something. Number 2, last week, the second preemptive habit was pay attention to your narratives. Say with me, 1, 2, 3. Pay attention to your narratives. In other words, don't ignore the conversation that you're having in yourself with yourself. Okay? There's a you, and you're talking to you all the time. And this inner conversation, when married with that sense of tension, is a very potent and powerful defensive system that can save you from blowing up your life. So we shouldn't ignore these narratives, but we should pay attention to them. And sometimes these narratives, like we discussed last week, are negative. They're not good. They're nonsensical. They're maybe even downright evil, and they can lead us down a path that we don't want to go down. Again, we should not ignore the dragons in our hearts, the dragons in our mind, because even though at first they may seem small and cute like a cat, they will feed off our negativity. They will feed off our bad choices. They will feed off our sense of failure, and they will grow to take control of us. So either we control them or they control us. Okay, week 3, preemptive habit number 3. What do I want to talk to you about today? I want to talk today about the idea that we should pay attention to the voices of wisdom. That we should pay attention to the voice of wisdom. So, kick off this third message. Let me start by asking you this question. Have you ever heard of genetic fallacy? Crickets. Well, you have, but you just don't know it's called genetic fallacy. Sometimes it's called the origins fallacy or other things. But basically what it means is it's that way of thinking. So genetic fallacy is an error in our way of thinking, error in rationality, an error in logic. It's that thing we learn like we're in primary school where, for example, a dog has 4 legs, yes? A cat has 4 legs, yes? Therefore, cats and dogs must be the same thing, yes? No. right? That's a genetic fallacy. Another one. Okay, George lives in a massive apartment complex. Therefore, George must have a massive apartment. You're going to go, well, no, not necessarily. I mean, you have a small one. I mean, it depends what he paid, right? I mean, apartment, exactly. So the genetic fallacy is where we think irrationally. We kind of associate things blindly. It's where, literally speaking, we discount the reliability of information based on the source rather than on the merit of the information. Now, we know it's not true, and we say that's not logical. We're educated, and we're mature adult human beings. So, of course, the dog sharing 4 legs of the cat is not making the same thing. But you'd be surprised that even though we're good at spotting the obvious things, so often we fall into this trap. Why? Because in our own lives, when it comes to us becoming our own worst enemy, we often discount the reliability of information because of the source. Not because of its merit, not because of what it means, not because of what it is. We discount it because of where it comes from. In other words, we can become suspicious of information because of the source. Now, depending on where you are right now, maybe you're here and you're a teenager, and so this might be your parents. No matter what your parents say to you, you're going to judge it not on what they're saying, but on who's saying it. So to you, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. They're your parents. What do parents know? They're all stupid, right? I mean, you text your friend on the 400-euro phone your parents bought you because they're so stupid and could afford to give you a house and life and a phone. Anyway, let's not go there. Maybe you're here, you're in a place where you're at work and you have this tension with your boss. And so again, it doesn't matter what he or she is saying to you, because you don't like them, you're just going to be suspicious and possibly ignore what might be good advice, not because of the merits of the advice, but because of the source. Maybe it's here and you've been burned by, I don't know, maybe you've come from a background of a broken relationship, and so to you, this one woman hurt you, therefore all women have hurt you. Therefore, no matter what a woman says, no matter how good, how clear, how helpful it is, you will not listen simply because it's a woman, which is absolutely stupid. And you and I, we know it's stupid, yet we do it all the time. Why is it stupid? Because we know that good advice, good wisdom, doesn't matter what source it comes from. If it's good on its merits, it's good for us. Advice should not be judged, therefore. Advice should be judged, therefore, by its merits and not on its source. This is crucial for us not being our own worst enemy. You want to know how not to be your own worst enemy? Don't judge advice basically on its source, but judge it on its merits. Next slide, please. Because again, as we think about this year, 2020, and this whole decade, there's constantly people in our lives who care for us, who love us, who are speaking. I mean, even the person that thinks they've no one in this place. Let me tell you something. You have someone. You go, well, no, I don't. You got someone in this room right now. We love you, and we're for you, and we'll back you. And all of us have wise voices that are there to kind of complement the inner tension, that speak against or sometimes to the inner narratives that want to save us from becoming our own worst enemy. This is crucial. Why? Because, again, we know this intuitively. Think about your own life. Think about my life. Think about what we know of people's lives in general. Most people who became their own worst enemy were warned. Like, people that you know, come on, people who their marriages blew up or their businesses blew up or they blew themselves up and got to a really nasty place, maybe addiction or some poor choices economically or fell into a lifestyle of gambling, whatever it may be. We know these people, and we know that they didn't just fall in one day. The dragon didn't just appear one day. It was a series of bad decisions. And there was usually someone there in around their lives who was trying to warn them. But they did not listen to the warning. Someone at some stage said, this isn't a good idea. Or maybe someone at some stage said, I don't think this is wise. But again, because of where it came from, a parent, a boss, a teacher, a policeman, a doctor, a brother, a sister, a neighbor, a cousin, we discounted and ignored the advice. We ignored the wisdom, not because of its merit, but because of its source. And our worst decisions, I mean the big ones, the ones that keep us awake at night, the ones that still hurt, the ones that we're living in a new reality because the consequences weren't just, oh, that was bad, but actually it affected how we relate to our ex-spouse, or the access we have to our children, or where our bank account is, or the fact that we owe money. Our worst decisions, the big one, the one that we all wish, man, if I could go back and change this one thing, my life would be so much better. Understand, we all have those. We all have those, okay? But our worst decisions are always preceded by a series of unwise decisions. Next slide, please. Okay, so our worst decisions are always preceded by a series. In other words, we didn't just end up one day where we ended up. We didn't just fall into, I know it feels like we fell into a hole, but actually it was the consequence of many small steps, of many times ignoring the wise voices around us that led us into a place of deep regret, of pain, of hurt. That wasn't just, again, this is what's so crucial, it didn't just affect or hurt us. You know, when you become your own worst enemy, it isn't just you who you're becoming an enemy to, it's those that you love. It's those that you care about. That's why it's so painful. But none of us fall into a trap all of a sudden. We keep feeding this dragon until one day we think we're mastering it, and one day it begins to master us, and all of a sudden we are in trouble. Now, the question is, okay, so what can we do? I mean, what can we do? I mean, what could God say to us today, 21st century Ireland, audience cinema? It's now 11:42. What can God say to us now to help us in this? And to kind of answer that question, we're going to look at a famous story in the Old Testament, okay? I'll tell you where it is in a second. But we're going to look at a character that maybe you have not heard of, okay? He's the fourth king of Israel, okay? Now, maybe you've heard this guy called Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel, right? And how you might know Saul, if you grew up around church at all, is because Saul was the guy that was too cowardly to go out and face Goliath, right? Remember that story? So Saul sent out David. And David became king after Saul. Basically, Saul wasn't really following God, and so Saul was ejected, and David became king. Now, David had a son called Solomon. And Solomon is regarded as the wisest person that ever lived. And if I don't know if you like biblical history, if that's your thing, but it's important to note that when Solomon was king, the king of Israel was never as strong or as united, or was never as close to fulfilling its potential as it was under the control of Saul. But there was a problem, you see, because even though Solomon started off wise and following his father's footstep, David, by honoring the Lord, over time he kind of drifted away from the direction and the legacy his father gave him as it pertained to loving and serving God. In fact, it got so bad that he became so obsessed with himself that he started like building statues to himself and to kind of keep peace. He married so many women. Solomon married so many women, he didn't even know their name. They came with a number. Who are you? Number 7. Okay. Like, let me tell you something. I don't care. He is not the wisest guy in the world. I got a rule. One wife, one life. It's enough for killing money. You know what I'm saying? So, Ginny Macklin. Sometimes we have that conversation, couples, we joke, so if I die, will you remarry? It's absolutely not. Fine to get my freedom. Are you crazy? Don't say it to your wife. It doesn't go down well, okay? So Solomon's so many wives. And what happens is because he makes these poor choices, this is really crucial for you young, who you choose isn't just a person, it's a path. Who you choose isn't just a person, it's a path. Because when you tether yourself to them, you're with them. And so Solomon, even though he was advised by his father and by the Lord to find some of the same faith that they could walk together in God's purpose, he didn't listen to that. He ignored that sound advice, that wisdom, and he married whoever he wanted. And in that process, he lost his faith. And Solomon became a pagan king because he ended up worshiping all the gods of his wives. That's the definition of a pagan, one that worships many gods. So Solomon's story ends that the kingdom's intact, but he had a son. Here's the guy you don't know, maybe you've heard of before. His name was Rehoboam. Say it with me, Rehoboam. Okay, so we just call him Reho for the crack. And so Rehoboam is Solomon's son. And the idea is that Rehoboam's going to ascend to the throne, become king, and what happened in David's lifetime and Solomon's lifetime should continue on for his lifetime. However, what we're going to see very practically is exactly what I want you to see in terms of today's message. Now, to help me kind of get into that first, let me give you some context, okay? So, in 2 Kings 12:28, we're not going to look at those verses, we're going to look at some other verses. We find that there's this other guy called Jeroboam. Okay, I don't know what's going on with the Boams or Ohms, but it's just maybe it was in fashion, I don't know. It's like just the other day I was walking somewhere and I was in a cafe shop and I heard someone say, Alexa! And I was expecting the computer to respond. And it was a child. And I went, oh, that was a bad... If your child's name Alexa, I no offense, but that's, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so Jeroboam is he's like a leader in Solomon's government, and one day he's coming back to the capital city from doing a job, and this prophet shows up out of the blue and basically says, hey, God is going to remove the kingdom from Saul, and he's going to divide it in two. Saul's son Rehoboam will have 2 tribes, but to you God's going to give 10. In other words, what the prophet was saying was that because of Solomon's error, because of his lack of wisdom, because he wasn't listening to what God was saying, God was going to take the kingdom off of him, tear it apart, and give some of the tribes to Jeroboam's leadership and some to Rehoboam. And of course, Solomon heard this and did what every king or monarch does whenever their throne is threatened. He tried to kill Jeroboam. So Jeroboam flies off to Egypt in retreat, hiding, and waits for the day when Solomon's inevitable death takes place. In which case, at this point, everyone's preparing to inaugurate his son Rehoboam to become king. And that's where our story picks up in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1 to 7. Verse 1 says this. It says, Rehoboam went to Shechem, which was the ancient capital city of Israel. For all of Israel had gone there to make him king. So Rehoboam, his father's dead. He's getting ready to be coronated, but take over the kingship. This is what his whole life has been about, this moment to become king. Verse 2, but when Jeroboam, there we go, heard about this, he returned from Egypt. Now watch this, verse 3. So they sent to Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said, now watch this. You see, go back. There was some kind of connection to where even though Rehoboam was the legitimate king of the people, Jeroboam had the hearts of the people. You know, his work ethic, his leadership over the years, his example to the people gave him an influence that maybe wasn't organizational or constitutional, but was very real. And you know, if we're going to succeed in life, especially if you own a business here, entrepreneurial, or you lead multiple departments, understand that a badge does not give someone influence. Sometimes a person have a title and the influence, that's really good. But sometimes a person who has no title, no badge, actually has all the influence. And if you're going to build a great business or lead a great department or whatever, manage a great store, you need to know who your influences are. So the people basically chose Jeroboam as their spokesperson. Again, Rehoboam had no clue what had been prophesied years earlier to Jeroboam. So they all went to Rehoboam and they said, verse 4, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. This is great. I mean, Rehoboam started his whole journey, and Jeroboam leads this charge, this protest, this strike, so to speak. And basically what they're demanding, they're not demanding anything crazy. They're just saying, we know from historical facts that Solomon at his height had 150,000 men conscripted, not paid, conscripted into service just to build statues of Solomon. So while these guys should have been on their farm making money for their family, they're forced into labor to build statues without being paid. And so they come and say, your father put a heavy yoke on us. But if you would just lighten the harsh labor, they didn't even ask to stop it. They didn't say we quit. Just cut us some slack. Do us a favor. Help us out, and we will serve you. It seems like a very fair and honest proposition. Now, in verse 5, Rehoboam makes the first of 2 really, really wise choices. He says, verse 5, go away for 3 days and then come back to me. So the people wait. In other words, Rehoboam says, okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear you. Let's reconvene this meeting in 3 days' time. Give you some time to think, me some time to think, and then we'll come to a conclusion. Which, by the way, is a really good strategy when you have to make really important decisions. Just because you feel pressured in the moment doesn't mean you should make the decision. Wisdom says, let me listen to what you're saying. Of course, understand, if you're married or you're a parent or you're someone in management or leadership, oftentimes what people are saying is not what they're saying. They may say, I want, or I'd like, or I need. What they're actually saying is, do you hear me? Do you understand me? And if leaders, husbands, wives, parents, if we can communicate in a way that tells the other person that I hear what you're saying, not that I'm going to do what you're asking me to do, understand the difference? But I hear you. That's really wise. So it seems like, first off, as the story begins, Rehoboam is making some very wise decisions. In verse 6, Rehoboam makes his second really wise decision. Why? Because then, during the 3 days, he consults the elders. Who are the elders? The owl fellas, the old ones, the gray hairs, the no hairs. They're saying they've been alive for centuries. You know what I'm saying? When you talk about history to them, it's a memory. You know what I'm saying? They were there. You know what I'm saying? The ancient history, they lived it. You know what I'm saying? So Rehoboam, this young, upstart king, makes this brilliant choice. Man, there's a complex, socio-political issue here. It's my first real decision as a king. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go and talk to all the dudes that formed the council of advisors for my father. I mean, obviously, they did a good job. If Solomon was as successful and as famous as he was. Therefore, let me go and consult them and ask them their advice. So it continues in verse 6. He asked the question, how would you advise me to answer these people? I mean, what a great question. You know what? You're not sure about a relationship, go to someone who's an authority figure. How would you advise me? Not sure about a certain financial decision, go to some people who you trust, who you see in their lives what you want to have in your life one day. Be careful, because so often the people that want to give all the advice, their lives are a disaster. You ever notice this? The first people to speak who seem so wise, when you look at their life, it's an absolute disaster. Let me encourage you, don't discount the voice of those who've gone before. Yeah, they may be old. Yeah, they may be gray. They may still not know how to text properly or send, emails. But nonetheless, they've lived. They've lived on this earth a long time. And if they've lived well, then their voice deserves to be heard. Why? Because their voice can make the difference in your life, ending up good, bad, or you becoming, like I said, your own worst enemy. So Rehoboam asks this brilliant question. Even though they're subject to him, even though he's the king, even though they're servants, he says, how would you advise me to answer these people? And verse 7, they replied, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. Isn't that good advice? I mean, they're basically, if you just come to them with the posture of a servant, if you show some love, if you show some care, if you value them, you will have their hearts. Not only will you have the positional influence, but you'll have the actual relational influence, because they'll know that we serve a king who has our best interests. And it's so true to all of us, don't we? Whether it's a coach at a rugby team or a friend or a spouse or a manager, what we really want is to follow someone who we feel really cares for us. Doesn't matter what your badge says. If you want influence, the advice these elders gave to young Rehoboam and he gives to us today is that if we would just become servants and serve these people, they will love you. In other words, what they're saying to Rehoboam is if you put their interests ahead of yours, your kingdom will endure, your legacy will continue, you'll be able to pass on something greater to your children, God's promises and purposes and extraordinary purpose will come to pass. I mean, if you just put them first, they will put you first. Why? Because people don't care. People don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care, you see? And so if we love people, and if we help each other in marriage, in our family, in our workplaces, in school, or our friends, then all of a sudden this incredible synergy happens where our interests become their interests, okay? So far, Rehoboam was doing quite good. 2 decisions, really wise, really clever, really smart. It seems like all is going well until verse 8. But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him. Now, the reason why he rejected the advice wasn't because of the merits of the advice, it was because of the source, as we're going to see in a second. You see, what we understand is the advice he was given was good, right? It was what he needed to hear. He needed that advice. But, and we can identify with this, okay? It wasn't what he wanted to hear. And so often, that's how we know advice. Because it's not what we want to hear, but it is what we need to hear. But also it's so important for us to recognize as we see ourselves in the story is that it was the only way that he was going to get to where he wanted to be. The only way he was going to get to where he wanted to be was by listening to the advice he needed to hear. But this is also true for us. Why? This is how you or me and how we end up where we don't want to be. We need to hear some advice. We don't want to hear it. Even though it's the only way to get where we want to be, we don't listen to the advice. We discount it because of the source. And oftentimes, that's exactly how you end up where you don't want to be. So let me just make this a little bit more confrontational and challenging for just a second, okay? Hold your breath. You are exactly where you wanted to be. Because you are where your choices led you to be. It's no one's fault. Not society, your parents, the world, economic system. You made your choices. Over and over and over again, I made my choices. And where I have been my own worst enemy, I have been my own worst enemy because I made choice that led me to where I am. So the question is simply this: whose advice are you ignoring? Who's around you that knows the tension that you're ignoring, that's aware of the narratives, and is saying, I don't know if this is smart. I don't think this is wise. Maybe you shouldn't. But we're ignoring those voices, discounting their merit because of their source, and saying, no, you know what? I know better. Whose advice are you ignoring? Now, verse 8, the story continues. So Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men. You see, his problem was these old guys, these old farts know nothing. I mean, come on. They can't even, take a selfie properly. They don't have an Instagram account. I mean, they can't even transfer funds electronically. They can't even pay Apple Pay. They don't have a clue. How could they ever, think they could advise or input into my life? They don't know my struggle. I'm so unique. I mean, I'm not one of 8 billion people. I'm just so unique that no one knows my struggle, right? So Rehoboam goes, you know what? Thank you, but no thank you. I'm going to get all my friends, all the young men who have lived no life whatsoever, who had grown up with him and were serving him. So basically, he's now surrounded himself with people who are young, who are his friends, who are kind of serving him, meaning they're just going to tell him what he wants to hear. You want a sure way of ruining your life? Surround yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear. And then when you get to where you don't want to be, guess what happens? The ones that told you to go there aren't there anymore. In fact, the really tricky ones will tell you to do the things exact opposite to what they do. Because they know where the path leads and they're not dumb enough to follow their own advice. But we, on the other hand, we end up in the hole and go, how did I get here? And where's my buddy gone? How come he isn't in this hole? Because he was smarter. And so Rehoboam rejects the advice and turns to the young men and he asks them in verse 9, what's your advice? How should we answer these people who said to me, lighten the yoke your father put upon us? Now, this is really interesting because not only has he made a bad decision in terms of rejecting the elders' advice, but he's also made another poor decision that he's now listening to the wrong group of people. Who you listen to isn't just a listening exercise. The advice that you allow in your life shapes your life. In many cases, people who you surround yourself with will determine where you go. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. There's so many axioms and sayings that are just true. And what we find is that Rehoboam's kind of turmoil leads to an interesting life principle. And that is this, that the problem with always doing what you want to do is you eventually arrive at precisely where you don't want to be. The problem with always doing, I don't want restraint. I don't have to say no to certain food. I don't have to say no to a certain company. I don't want to say no to going to the party. I don't want to say no to compromising my faith. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a little thing. It's a small thing. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Well, usually we end up at precisely the place we did not want to be. And so the young men respond in verse 10. They say, these people have said to your father, put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. But you go, what? Time out. We're tracking, we're with you, Jamie. It's really good, but what the heck does that mean? Did Rehoboam have an unusually big little finger? I mean, it was some abnormality. I mean, what does he mean? Of course, first reading you go, that makes no sense. But when you understand the culture, this period in time, several hundred years before the birth of Jesus, being overweight, okay, this is going to sound crazy, but being overweight, being fat, being large, basically was an indication of your wealth and your power. Think about it. You notice, where a lot of people at this time were starving and struggling to put food on the table, most people who were poor were skinny. So one of the ways you'd know a wealthy or successful person was they were fat. So Solomon was a very jolly king, okay? Let's put it that way. And so what the guys are saying is that, tell the people, you think my father was fat. My little finger is fatter than my father. Now, if you want to try that sometime, let me know how it goes with someone. But the point is, Rehoboam the advice he's been given is, you need to be worse. If your father was here, you need to outdo him. You need to show these people what it means to be subjugated to a really strong leader. So verse 11, it continues, my father laid on you, he says, a yoke. I will make it even heavier. I mean, come on, man. Did I hear the people? No, I'll make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Now, he didn't mean actual animal scorpions. A scorpion was a type of whip that had like bone in it. So when it whipped you, it would pull the flesh off your back. You ever seen the Passion of the Christ? That's kind of like the cat's tails. That's kind of like what a scorpion is. In other words, my father treated you like prisoners. He conscripted you, next slide. He conscripted you to his service. I will treat you like criminals. See, lashing by scorpion tails was a penalty given to criminals. So you think it was bad just working and being away from your family? My father treated you like prisoners. I will treat you like criminals. You want to destroy your relationships? You want to destroy the people close to you? Treat them like trash. Treat them like crap. And even though they'll absorb and absorb and absorb and absorb and absorb and absorb and absorb, one day they won't absorb anymore. And you'll come home and see the key doesn't work. Or you'll text that person, they don't respond to you. Or you'll go into that place, that person, they've moved on. You want to blow up your most important relationships, treat people like crap and see where it gets you. So, continuing in verse 12. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam. So Jeroboam was leading this group. The king answered in verse 13, the people harshly, rejecting the advice given by the elders. Now understand this is really crucial. You know, it's not just what he's saying, it's how he's saying it, okay? Because when it comes to communication, understand, this is just a freebie for you if you're in a relationship or you're married or about to be married or whatever. You know, it's not just what we say in life, it's how we say it. All I said was, yes, but it's how you say it. This is something that I constantly get in trouble for because I tend to have a very kind of forthright personality. It's not just why you're saying it or what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. And what's so interesting is this is the tipping point. This is the moment. I mean, you think that all the potential in Rehoboam's life, he could become a great king, he could lead a great dynasty, he could leave a great legacy for his son, he could be a great instrument of God's blessing to the earth. I mean, he's so much potential. This is the moment where Rehoboam becomes his own worst enemy. And we see in this, again, another principle, that is this, that one unwise decision can lead to catastrophic events. Sometimes we're only ever only one wise decision from completely blowing up our lives, our families, our friendships, our careers, our mental health, our physical health. One unwise decision. So in verse 14 he says, he followed the advice of the young men and said, my father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Skip to verse 16. When all Israel saw that the king refused to. See, it wasn't about the labor, was it? What was it about? Listening. When they saw the king refused to listen to the advice that they were trying to give him as his people, as the elders, they answered the king. Look after your own house, David, basically. Which again, just to give you some clarity, this is a song. This little kind of thing is a song that was sang at the time of David's. So when David became king and there were some people who were against him or disagree with him, they created this poem. Now, 3 generations later, people have found this poem. It's like a chant, and they basically say, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? Jesse was David's father. To your tents, Israel, look after your own house, David. Which, again, when you read that, you go, what's so special? Okay, this sentence I put in bold for you, okay, this is the equivalent of a Hebrew saying, up yours. Okay, like, it's not like, look after your own house, David. It's like, up yours. We're out of here. We're done. We're fed up. Here we are, working in your kingdom, keeping you safe, supplying grain to your house, making sure that you continue as king. Well, you know what? We're done. We're out of here. We're gone. Each man to his own tent. Everyone look after yourself. So in verse 17, the Israelites went home, but some who were still in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. And Rehoboam makes one last absolutely stupid, unwise decision. To the Israelites that lived under his command, he sent Adoniram. Adoniram, very interesting name. He was in charge of forced labor. So Rehoboam goes, well, I'm still king. And despite what you said, even though that went disastrously unwell, I'm still going to have my way. So he sends Adoniram to basically go to the cities and enforce slave labor, and they stone him to death. All Israel stoned him to death. So verse 19. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this very day. In other words, here we are, easily almost 3,000 years later, and this is still a reality. At the house of David, the Israelite people are divided because of one unwise decision that led to a catastrophic loss. You see, because of one unwise decision, the kingdom was lost. It was weak. It was vulnerable. And it is now invadable. That's exactly what happened. Both kingdoms were invaded by Babylonians and Assyrians. They were subjugated for hundreds of years, and there's a whole story there. But what I want you to see is the same is true of our lives. That because of one unwise decision, our lives can be lost. We can become weak. We can become vulnerable. And we can be invadable. So my question is, as we end this series and this message, is whose advice are you currently ignoring? Whose advice are you currently ignoring? Because to you it may just be noise, clatter, oh, what does he know? What does she know? I mean, I'm older, I'm younger, I'm male, she's female, I'm black, he's white, I'm a manager, he's on the dole. I mean, whatever the excuses, whatever rationale, we're trying to use to discount the advice because of the source, I want to ask you to stop and think, whose advice are you currently ignoring? Why? Because somebody can see what you can't see. Somebody has perspective. Maybe it's age, maybe it's experience, maybe it's just old-fashioned wisdom. I don't know what it is, but somebody can see what you can't see. And we understand that private decisions always lead to public consequences. What you think you're deciding in secret, the whole world would know. Why? Because your private decisions lead to a very obvious lifestyle. You may think, well, what's the worst that can happen? No one will ever know. Eventually, everybody will know. And maybe they don't know because you haven't told them or anyone said anything, but everyone will know because of what they see in your life. One of the wisest things you can do, again, if you're a young person, is so crucial, is rather than thinking, oh man, it's too difficult to go and talk to a pastor, a leader, a friend, a connect group leader about this thing I'm struggling with. I'll just keep it to myself. Better share it with one person now than share it with the whole world later. Better one person knows now that you trust, that can give you good advice, that has your back, that won't judge you or put you down, or that will love you, than in 6 months, 6 years, 16 years' time, the whole world laughing, judging, mocking, saying, I always knew that guy would never amount to anything. See, Rehoboam had an opportunity to make a wise choice. But he made one unwise choice that led to the blowing up of his life, his dynasty, his legacy, in fact, all of history. Wise voices set you up for wise choices. Your life is better when you're surrounded by wise voices. I thank God. People ask me all the time, as a young man, how did you get to where you get to? I don't take any credit. I have surrounded myself with wise voices. I got great parents. I got great parents-in-law. I got 3 guys in the world who are like mentors to me, fathers to me. And periodically throughout the year, I just touch base with them. In fact, I'm going to see one the next month. I sit with them and they'll ask me questions about my life and my emotional health and boundaries and all these things. And I listen to their advice. In fact, one of these guys, he's a really successful guy. And I remember when I met him for the first time, I sat with him. He gave me like an hour of his time, which was very generous. And the next time I met him, he said, what, I'm going to keep meeting with you. And I said, well, why? He said, because you do what you follow the advice I give you. And people who have good advice, people who are successful, they want nothing more than to share their good advice with people, but they won't share it with people who won't listen to them. And so I am reaping benefits of a great marriage and 3 beautiful kids and a great job and great life and great stuff. Not that it's easy. Hey, I still am my own worst enemy, guys. You come live with me for a week and watch me screw it up consistently, because I do. But nonetheless, overall, I'm in a good place. Why? Because wise voices in my life have led to me making wise choices. So in conclusion then, as we wrap this thing up, every habit begins with a first time. Every pattern begins with a first line. Every journey, it's okay, I know exactly what that was like. I had 3 of them, not easy. But every journey begins with a first step. So commitment number 1, remember the first message I said, okay, I want to give you a practical commitment to help you. The commitment was, I will pause until I pinpoint the cause. I'll explore rather than ignore. Pay attention to the tension. Week 2, last week, commitment 2 was, I will demolish every narrative that conflicts with the value system introduced by Jesus. In other words, when you find yourself thoughts flooding into your mind saying you are worthless, you are hopeless, you will go nowhere, you will amount to nothing, you will demolish those, because that is not true. Because God loves you, and God has called you, and God has a plan and purpose for you, and we love you, and we want to help and support you, and you have value, and you have worth, and you have a future. And even though right now you may say, oh, you don't know my story, it's so sticky, I've done so many bad things, I've made so many bad decisions, and I have become my own worst enemy, I've blown my life up, and everyone around me, it's okay, you're in the right place. Church is not for perfect people. Church is for broken people who need a perfect Jesus. It's in the right place. The last commitment is this. I will not automatically discount advice based on the source. But I will listen. Because sound advice leads to sound choices. So remember, number 1, pay attention to the tension. Number 2, pay attention to the narratives. And number 3, pay attention to wisdom. Because if you can do all these 3 things, you will not be your own worst enemy. So the question is, how do we not be our own worst enemy? 1, 2, 3, you'll become your best friend. Amen? So I want to pray for you as we close off this series that these things will be a reality in your life that will help you, and that God's great plan and purpose for your future. Even if you're here, you're not a Christ follower, I still believe for you your life has incredible value and worth, and the future ahead of you is amazing. And this year, this decade will be the best one for you. I'm praying that for you. Even those who don't know, I'm praying that for you, that you will be your own best friend, not your own worst enemy. So I invite you to stand. We're going to pray, and the band are going to lead us in a song.